Hello, welcome to Logic with Aaliyah. Today we are going to talk about what is symbolic logic. It's basically a system that is used to determine when an argument is valid or invalid. There are multiple ways that one can use this system to those benefits. Alright, so when we're talking about arguments, we're not talking about people yelling at each other and getting angry, okay? We're talking about when people have opposing viewpoints and they can argue for their sides. So these aren't necessarily right or wrong. It's kind of like debate. I say that I like chocolate because it's sweet and it gives me endorphins, so I feel like I'm getting a hug. But that doesn't mean that someone else has to like chocolate for those same reasons. They could, in fact, not like chocolate. So that's an argument that proves an opinion using statements. Arguments can be about other things, though. Logic doesn't necessarily go over how arguments can be debatable. There isn't always going to be a definite true or false at the end. So, what do arguments look like in logic, and how can we recognize when we've come across an argument? Well, there are two parts to a traditional argument. There's the conclusion, which is the main part of the argument. It's like the claim. It's like your thesis. It's what you really want to convey, what you want to convince others of. And then there are premises, evidence, reasoning, the body of your paper, what supports your claim and makes it valid or not. Now, these two parts rely on each other. The conclusion cannot be justified without support from the premises. So there are different types of arguments. There are valid arguments, invalid arguments, sound arguments, and unsound arguments. Valid arguments are when the premises support the conclusion. Okay, from this, most definitely comes that. However, this has nothing to do with truth. I know that seems strange because validity usually is associated with truth, not so much in logic. Because you can have a valid argument with all false premises. Just so long as those premises support the conclusion, it doesn't really matter whether they're true or not. Now, invalid arguments, same thing. They don't rely on the truth of anything. They just rely on the connection. So an invalid argument is when the premises do not support the conclusion, when they're like totally unrelatable whatsoever, and there's no connection between them. Others would say an invalid argument is when you have all true premises, and yet your conclusion ends up being false. But we can't always prove the truth of our conclusion to say whether it becomes invalid based on the premises or what. So, just gonna leave that open. Now, what about sound arguments? This is when it actually matters if things are true or not. So, a sound argument cannot be invalid, okay? Sound arguments are only valid arguments. And specifically, they are valid arguments that have true premises. What about unsound arguments? Unsound arguments either are invalid or they have false premises. Even one false premise is going to make your argument unsound. That means that maybe it's valid, maybe it follows logical sense, but somehow it's nonsense. It's like when someone goes crazy and they really believe something, but it's just not true. Like, say someone makes a claim about invisible people watching them. Or let's say someone makes a claim about a purple rhinoceros in the room. They say, I know this purple rhinoceros is here in the room with me because I can see it and hear it. and it's standing right over there. Now, those premises support that conclusion, but if no one else in the room can see the purple rhinoceros, it's more than likely a hallucination and not actually real. That would make this argument valid but unsound. It doesn't work in the real world. It only works in the minds of those who experience another reality